Welcome to The Explainer. Let's dive right in. Because today, we are unpacking one of history's absolute most traumatic military standoffs. We are looking at a moment where ancient geopolitics literally collided head-on with theology, in just the most spectacular way possible. We're going to explore the brutal historical impact of the Assyrian army, dig into this wild clash of human pride versus divine defense, and uncover the deep historical reasons behind the survival of a single besieged city. It's gonna be a fascinating ride. So, what happens when an unstoppable ancient army faces divine intervention? It's a compelling question, right? Just imagine the sheer terror for a second. The Assyrian war machine was the superpower of its day, an unstoppable juggernaut that systematically chewed up and spit out surrounding nations. And now, this absolute force is parked right outside an untouched city, Jerusalem. The stakes couldn't possibly be higher. The city's survival defies literally all military logic of the era. So how exactly does a seemingly invincible army meet its match without a single sword being drawn by the defenders? Let's start with Section 1, the Assyrian war machine and the threat to Jerusalem. To truly grasp this threat, we have to recognize that the Assyrians were methodical, brutal masters of siege warfare. They had already reduced the region's defense to cities to just ruinous heaps. Isaiah chapter 37, verse 8 states, "So Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria warn against Libnah, for he had heard that he was departed from Lachish." Rabshakeh was essentially the voice of the Assyrian king, a high-ranking military emissary. This text maps out his strategic movements during this brutal campaign, as he traveled between these conquered strongholds to report back to King Sennacherib. It paints the picture of a highly mobile, terrifyingly close military operation that's just tightening its grip around the whole region. But then, the narrative takes a massive, unexpected turn. 185,000. Just think about that number for a second. That represents the staggering number of Assyrian casualties at Jerusalem. What makes this so mind-blowing is that it wasn't the result of some drawn-out battle with the Judean army. According to the text, this was a sudden divine judgment. And Rabshakeh, that high-ranking emissary who had just been traveling around delivering terrifying ultimatums, narrowly escapes this staggering destruction, making his way back to his king. Which brings us to Section 2, the pride of Sennacherib and defying the Holy One. So what actually triggers such a colossal reversal? Well, we've got to look at the core agitation of the narrative, the sheer, unadulterated pride of King Sennacherib of Assyria. The conflict shifts from a physical siege to a profound spiritual defiance. Isaiah chapter 37, verse 23 states, "Whom hast thou reproached and blasphemed, and against whom hast thou exalted thy voice and lifted up thine eyes on high, even against the Holy One of Israel?" This is a huge turning point. The text emphasizes that Sennacherib wasn't just attacking a physical city of stone and wood, he was actively and publicly challenging Israel's God. He exalted his own voice above the divine, turning a geopolitical conquest into a direct theological confrontation. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the perfect contrast it shows between the king's ego and divine sovereignty. Look at Sennacherib's boast. He claims ultimate, self-made power over nature itself. "I dam the rivers to dry them up. I cut my way through the forest." He genuinely believes his chariots and his armies are the ultimate forces of the universe. But then, look at God's reality. God simply counters with, "I have formed it, and I brought it to pass." The text is exposing a massive, fatal blind spot in Sennacherib's worldview. This is summarized perfectly in the text. Isaiah chapter 37, verse 26 states, "Hast thou not heard long ago how I have done it, and of ancient times that I have formed it? Now have I brought it to pass, that thou shouldest be to lay waste defenced cities into ruinous heaps." Talk about dramatic irony. The Assyrian king thought his victories were purely his own doing, but the text reveals that God was actually the one who had historically allowed Assyria their temporary power, using them as the instrument that laid waste to those cities in the first place. Let's move to Section 3, Jerusalem's defiant stand and the daughter of Zion. Shifting our focus from the boasting king outside the walls to the besieged city of Jerusalem itself, you'd expect absolute panic, right? I mean, given the terrifying reputation of the Assyrian army, despair or total surrender seems logical, yet the text presents this astonishingly defiant reaction. To understand it, we need to look at this crucial term, the daughter of Zion. This isn't a specific individual. It's an abstract, collective feminine personification of the population. Specifically, it indicates that Jerusalem remains a virgin city. Despite this massive, brutal army encamped right outside, the city remains completely untouched and unravished by these invaders. And this brilliantly illustrates the posture of the people inside. Isaiah chapter 37 verse 22 states, "This is the word which the Lord hath spoken concerning him. The virgin, the daughter of Zion, hath despised thee and laughed thee to scorn. The daughter of Jerusalem hath shaken her head at thee." What an incredibly powerful image. You have the mighty Sennacherib, conqueror of the known world, and this unravished city is literally laughing him to scorn and shaking her head at his arrogance. It is the ultimate defiance, rooted in absolute confidence of divine protection. Which leads perfectly into section 4, the divine reversal, the hook and the bridle. This is the dramatic solution of the narrative right here. God's swift, physical, and deeply humiliating response designed to turn back the seemingly unstoppable Assyrian tide once and for all. The imagery used here is just striking. Isaiah chapter 37 verse 29 states, "Because thy rage against me and thy tumult is come up into mine ears, therefore will I put my hook in thy nose and my bridle in thy lips, and I will turn thee back by the way by which thou camest." Let's unpack that visceral metaphor. A hook in the nose and a bridle in the lips, that is how you treat a wild, dumb beast of burden, not a self-proclaimed God king. It shows the king being forcibly led away, stripped completely of his agency and his pride. And to prove this wasn't just empty rhetoric, a highly specific prophetic sign was given to the people of Judah. Let's walk through this timeline. In 701 BC, the first year, they wouldn't plant. They'd just eat what naturally grows of itself due to the disruption of the siege. In 700 BC, the second year, they would still eat what springs up naturally. But by the third year, 699 BC, regular agricultural life completely resumes. They sow, reap, and plant vineyards. This timeline was the exact tangible proof given that Assyria would be completely and permanently driven out of Judah. The text lays this out so clearly. Isaiah chapter 37, verse 30 states, "And this shall be a sign unto thee. Ye shall eat this year such as growth of itself, and the second year that which springeth of the same. And in the third year sow ye, and reap, and plant vineyards, and eat the fruit thereof." This connects directly to the timeline we just walked through. It's a rock-solid guarantee of the city's survival and a return to peace and prosperity, completely contradicting the Assyrian threat of total annihilation. And the fulfillment of that bridal metaphor is absolute. Isaiah chapter 37 verse 34 states, "By the way that he came, by the same shall he return, and shall not come into this city, saith the Lord." Sennacherib, despite all his terrifying boasting and massive siege engines, never even breached the walls of Jerusalem. He never set a single foot inside. After hearing the devastating rumor of his 185,000 slain troops, he is forced to retreat to his own land, exactly by the way he came. Finally, section 5, for God and David's sake, the ultimate why. Now we arrive at the ultimate why. We've seen the what and the how, but why did God choose to miraculously intervene for this specific city at this exact time? Well, Isaiah chapter 37, verse 35 states, "For I will defend this city to save it, for mine own sake, and for my servant David's sake." So the crucial point is that this salvation wasn't necessarily because the inhabitants of Jerusalem were perfect. Rather, the defense was rooted in two very specific historical and theological commitments. Let's break those down. First, we have the phrase, "for the Lord's sake." As detailed here, the reason for this was to publicly and undeniably prove that the Lord is the only God, and that the idols and gods of foreign nations, the ones Sennacherib so loudly mocked, are absolutely nothing. Sennacherib had publicly challenged the reputation of the God of Israel, so this miraculous defense was God's way of publicly vindicating his own name against that arrogance on a global stage. Second, it was for David's sake. This shows God's absolute faithfulness to an ancient covenant promise. Back in 1 Kings 9:5, a promise was made that David's seed would not fail to sit on his throne. If Jerusalem had been wiped out and its line of kings destroyed by the Assyrians, that promise would have been broken. God defends the city to maintain his absolute faithfulness to the promises he made to King David generations prior. It's a profoundly deep dynamic to consider when analyzing history through this text. We've seen an unstoppable army halted in its tracks, a boastful king led away like a beast, and a city saved to fulfill ancient promises. Which leaves us with this final thought. If the greatest ancient empires, with all their chariots, armies, and self-proclaimed glory, are merely tools in a much larger divine plan, what does that reveal about the true source of historical power? It really makes you look at the rise and fall of nations in a completely different light, doesn't it?